The United States is an interesting experiment in history. This is not a flag-waving, patriotic devo here, but I want to use the backdrop of the celebration of our independence as a spiritual point. As I say, it's an interesting experiment, not because it's the first time we've ever had a type of democracy. I mean, Greece and Rome had one, but theirs were slightly different. In Greece's case, it was even more directly democratic than ours is. There were direct votes for things, and even under Rome, that occurred a little bit, and they developed the concept of senators that you would elect. But really, that experiment only lasted until the dictators realized that there was power to be had. I don't know if that sounds funny, dictators and democracy, but the dictators allowed people to vote and have a certain amount of self-direction and autonomy. But eventually there was too much power to be had, and so the Caesars became emperors and ended the charade. When I was a little kid, growing up in Massachusetts, I was very aware of my state pride. And that used to be a thing, I guess. But I knew the stories of Paul Revere and various ones, and John Adams. And I was, however, misinformed. Or I just made the incorrect assumption that 1776, a date I knew, was the end of the war. I mean, independence, right? So we were no longer under Britain, so we must have already won the war. Well, obviously, in studying history, I was kind of surprised to learn that, wow, we date our beginning of our country not to the winning of a war, but the signing of a document. And that there was a war that had to be fought to confirm the signing of that document because Britain wasn't so thrilled with that document. And so this is kind of one of the things, and this is maybe a separate idea, a separate thought, but that revolution is kind of unique. And most revolutions don't have and for that reason most revolutions fail, either in the short term or the long term, that there were ideas first. These men sat in back rooms and debated and discussed what they wanted to be before they ever signed a document. And before a revolution ever occurred, it was based on ideas, and I believe that's one of the reasons it's lasted this long. Most are just steeped in anger, and people upset. Listen, you're not running this the right way. I want to run it. And that's why it eventually fails, because once they start running it, other people say, wait a minute, now I'm angry, and I want to run it, and I don't like the way you're running it, and so it usually falls apart pretty quick. But these were ideas, and they were firmly held ideas, and they were circulated ideas, so that by the time there was a war, people were kind of on board with this concept of self-governance. Well, having formed that idea and having fought a war over it, we then fleshed that out with more ideas, another document, a more detailed document, and those men, those founding fathers as we call them, understood that they were just men, and things weren't perfect, and there were things in there that they knew that there was going to have to be fought later, and so they put in a way for that to be changed, that document to be changed to reflect discovery and changing opinions of things. And then they entrusted that to another generation to carry that on. Now, that had to be a little unnerving to do that. You know, you're getting old, and like, I hope this next generation treats it the same. And it hasn't always. It's had a bumpy ride. But it's survived for about 250 years old, and to be fair, it's looking a little threadbare right now. It's looking a little kind of precarious. Is this thing going to continue or not? Why has it survived this long? There's not really a good explanation. I mean, there's nothing in our nation intrinsically that requires it to continue as it was designed. Uh, Essentially, everybody's been working on the honor system, on the trust system. We just trust that we do our part, and those who we elect will do their part, and more or less they do. Now, I'm not saying that this person will have more power and take some power to themselves, but we kind of trust that when that happens, there's a legal system, and those people are going to be arrested or prosecuted or at the very least voted out. But what would happen if a Supreme Court determined, we don't care about your laws. We're just, any law you pass, we're going to overturn. We want our system. Well, if the wrong people get in there, then that will happen. What if a president just decided, I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I'm just going to do my own thing. I don't care what laws you pass. Whatever. I'm the president. I'm like a king. What if a legislature decided, hey, we don't care if you vetoed that. This is the law, and we're just considering this is the law, and we're going to do what we can do to enforce ourselves. What if generals, what if we had a popular general or group of generals that just decided, we don't care what any of you all are doing. We've got a military and we can do whatever we want. Right? Then we would be China, where the rulers of the country are figureheads, and really it's the generals that do whatever they want to do. That's a different story also. But that hasn't happened for the most part. In certain cases, some of these things have happened. But if we ceased to listen to our founding fathers, then we would cease to exist as a country. We've been operating on the trust system, and that, again, as I say, it seems shaky. Not too many people are trusting that anymore. And when people don't trust those founding ideas, this experiment will be wrapped up. We'll be done. There's a lot of power, and it's very tempting. Well, this is the spiritual part. For 2,000 years, there's been a kingdom. It's not been a democracy ever at any point. It's not been intended to be. Some people treat it like that, but it is not intended to be a democracy. It's I guess, what we'd call a constitutional dictatorship. Much like our own country, it was inaugurated in blood, and it was summed up in a document. And that's been the history for 2,000 years. But the kingdom doesn't work when people don't trust the document. When we believe that certain parts are not applicable and we can just change things, or and at that point there will be a breakdown of the system. And God has told us that the gates of hell will not prevail against His kingdom. But that just means that in this location, because it's large, there might be people who pay attention to it and hold every letter as inspired by God. But in this place, people won't. And where people won't, where people think that they can change certain parts of it because it's more convenient or because it's more relevant now, and that part's not relevant, in those places it will not exist. You look at the ruins of ancient cities, right? We know that great civilizations were there. We are the pillar and support of truth. And when men decide not to trust the system as God gave it, that the pillars decline. We become like an ancient city. And one of two things occurs. We either disappear altogether, like some cities, which men don't even know if they really existed. Was that just a fantasy? Was that just made up stories? Or was it some kind of a real city? Atlantis, was that a real city? Probably, but it's been wiped off the face of the earth wherever it was. But in other places, like Athens or Rome, people might walk by the pillars that are still there and say, something great once happened here. And we will only be a testament to something that happened, where men trusted the founding father. And all of this comes down to one thing. It merely comes down to trust, to the honor system, to trusting a document that Christ was willing to die for. That is the great experiment. And God has worked that experiment with great success. And it will continue to be a success. The only question is whether we will be a part of it by trusting in it.